Forget the romanticized movies of the Middle Ages, where kings and queens sip wine by a roaring, cozy fireplace. That is a historical lie. The chilling truth is, the greatest symbol of power and wealth, the stone castle was actually a deadly trap. Picture this. You are a noble. You own a massive fortress built to defy the world. Yet every winter night, you face an invisible, merciless enemy that claimed more lives than any siege weapon ever could. The bone-chilling cold. Sounds absurd? Your castle has 8-foot thick walls, so why wouldn't it stay warm? Because the very material that granted it invincibility betrayed its owners. Stone. Stone absorbs the cold like a giant sponge, and once cold, it holds onto it with relentless persistence. Historians have recorded that temperatures inside the castle could be up to 20 degrees Celsius colder than the outside temperature. As snow fell outside, the stone walls turned the magnificent great halls into frozen tombs where you were trapped. Castles, built primarily between the 11th and 13th centuries for defense, completely ignored the concept we call insulation. Stone, unlike the wood of peasant huts, has an extremely high capacity to absorb and store thermal energy, or in this case, cold. When winter arrived, it drank up the frigid air and held it for months. When you tried to light a fire, the walls instantly sucked up the precious heat, rendering the fireplace useless. But if the fireplaces were useless, what desperate measures did they resort to just to stay alive? The problem wasn't just the material, it was the design. When darkness fell, the towering high ceilings, designed to impress guests during grand feasts, became death traps that drew all the warm air straight up and away, leaving the lower levels gripped by an icy chill that penetrated to the bone. You might think, just light a bigger fire. But those massive hearths, even those that dominated entire walls, were woefully inefficient. Most of the precious heat escaped straight out through poorly designed chimneys, or was immediately absorbed by the frigid stone walls. It's bitterly ironic. Many wealthy, noble families spent their nights colder than the poorest peasants in their small wooden cottages, which could be heated effectively by a central fire pit. When bedroom temperatures could drop to life-threatening levels, nobles were forced to turn their chambers into battlegrounds for survival. The romantic notion of a noble sleeping alone in luxury crumbled when faced with the risk of hypothermia. Sleep itself became a luxury the body couldn't afford to indulge in. The most effective strategy was to block the stone's cold with fabric. They hung heavy curtains, often made of multiple layers of wool and lined with fur, around the bed to create a smaller, more manageable space that could be warmed by body heat. This was no mere decoration. This was a medieval engineering marvel made of textile. The noble's bed became a sealed tent erected inside the cold stone room. Was this room within a room strategy enough to keep them from freezing to death? Is less than #4 number. The nobles had to retreat into this fabric cocoon as early as late afternoon to begin the long process of warming their sleeping space just with body heat, but that was insufficient. Servants, the guardians of the flame of survival, had to work through the night in dangerous conditions. They invented temporary, yet risky, heating implements. One such tool was the red-hot stone. Stones were heated in fires until they glowed red, then carefully transported using metal tongs to place under beds and in chambers. This measure was temporary and constantly risked burns or setting the castle ablaze. Additionally, they used primitive hot water bottles, heated metal or ceramic containers that became precious commodities, distributed by servants like medicine to the dying. Even with all the layers of woolen blankets, furs, and tapestries, many would wake with frost on their breath, and ice crystals formed on nearby surfaces in the room. Eleanor of Aquitaine wrote of nights when water froze solid in metal basins placed just feet from roaring fires, and mornings when servants had to chip ice from windows, ice that had formed on the inside of the chamber. This extreme hardship forced them to break social boundaries. What happened when nobles were forced to share a bed with others outside their class? Inside the castle, facing imminent hypothermia, social rules were temporarily suspended. This is when sheer survival took precedence, and noble rank meant little. Multiple people would share a bed, not by choice, but from the desperate need to pool their body heat. Nobles abandoned privacy and dignity, crowding together with family, guests, and even servants. Historical accounts describe earls and their servants sleeping in the same chambers, an arrangement that would have been a massive scandal under normal circumstances, but which became an accepted, life-saving survival strategy. The cold created a temporary democracy between master and servant. To maximize warmth, they resorted to another shocking practice: human hot water bottles. Some castles employed servants whose sole task was to warm the noble's bed. These unfortunate individuals would spend hours lying in the bed to warm the bedding with their body heat. Once done, they were dismissed to sleep in even colder conditions, often in stables or kitchens to find residual warmth. And one final desperate measure was recorded at the Château de Vincennes in the 14th century, bringing horses, cattle, and even pigs into the lower levels of residential areas. The purpose wasn't food, but to utilize their rising body heat to provide minimal warmth to the human occupants above. Imagine waking up in a grand hall filled with the smell of livestock just to feel a shred of warmth. But not everyone had the privilege of sleeping near livestock. What tragic fate awaited the castle guards? In this brutal war against the cold, the most tragic figures were the guards and watchmen. Their duty required them to remain exposed to the elements during the coldest, darkest hours. Although they developed complex systems of movement, constantly pacing predetermined routes to maintain circulation, many would be found frozen, stiff at their posts in the morning. Chronicles from 12th century Warwick Castle describe guards building small fires, but the light could give away defensive positions to enemies, and the smoke could alert besieging forces to the castle's activities. Many guards died not from enemy arrows, but from exposure, their bodies rigid with cold, still gripping their weapons in a final act of duty. The impact of these freezing nights extended far beyond individual suffering. The social and economic consequences were severe. High mortality rates from cold-related illness led to frequent succession crises. When heirs and secondary family members succumbed to hypothermia, it created power vacuums that could destabilize entire regions. The cost of maintaining warming systems was also financially crippling. Forests were decimated to provide fuel for inefficient heating systems. The constant need for professional servants to tend fires and warming devices created severe labor shortages in other critical castle areas. The cost of surviving one winter in a medieval castle often exceeded the annual revenue of smaller fiefdoms. Modern analysis of medieval castle construction reveals engineering flaws that seem almost incomprehensible: lack of proper insulation, absence of double wall construction, and poor ventilation systems. This suggests that the medieval builders' priorities lay entirely with defensive capabilities and symbolic power, while human comfort was relegated to a mere afterthought. After centuries of suffering, survival pressure finally influenced architecture. Later, castle designs began incorporating smaller rooms, lower ceilings, and more sophisticated heating systems. But here is the final mind-blowing twist. The solution to this 1000-year-old problem lay in a material so simple we take it for granted today: insulation. This air-trapping material was an inaccessible secret to medieval architects. They built humanity's greatest structures, yet they were its most lethal cold traps. The frozen deaths of thousands of nobles, servants, and guards within structures representing the pinnacle of engineering remind us. True nobility lies not in grand gestures and impressive structures, but in creating spaces where human life can flourish, rather than merely survive. If you are fascinated by history that debunks the myths and reveals raw survival stories like this, hit subscribe and ring the notification bell for the Flow of History channel so you don't miss the next flow of knowledge.